So I've only got 20 minutes to interview Alex on everything with regards to international data transfers, which will be quite a hassle, I guess. I'll try to include you as well, so I think we'll talk about like 10, 12 minutes, and then you're all invited to pose questions, because I think we have some international guests here as well, and data protection experts from larger companies that really depend on international data transfers to work.
Wonderful.
Okay, so maybe as a warm-up question.
Oh, sorry.
How's the Privacy Shield doing?
Well, first off, thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and I'm definitely very flattered, but not all totally true, but too kind. Privacy Shield is doing well. We just had our 3rd annual review, and having done 3 of these, I can say that with each successive one, we've had a greater and greater development of, I think, rapport and understanding between the European side and the US side in terms of the functioning of this mechanism. So somebody just sort of get the facts out there. So the Privacy Shield annual review, we had it September 12th and 13th in Washington at the end of last week. It was opened by Secretary of Commerce Ross and DG Astola from the European Commission. And it also included sort of a high-level participation from the Federal Trade Commission, the European Data Protection Board. And I think it was definitely sort of a very positive engagement, because we essentially went through the functioning of the Privacy Shield program and in a great deal of depth, and sort of dug into really sort of how things are working and the sort of achievements and sort of what areas we need to work on, and sort of what areas we can work together on. I mean, I think that also like there is a really good news story that 5,000 companies are now certified under the Privacy Shield framework. This is more than ever, and it's increasing, continuing to increase rapidly. And so that means that there's 5,000 companies who have made enforceable commitments to protect the privacy of European individuals, and also offer significant recourse mechanisms to those individuals. And so that really is a great value to sort of Europe and the United States, and underpins sort of the $7.1 trillion transatlantic economy. And also, I mean, I think the depth of support of the program from Europe and the United States was demonstrated by the fact that you had dozens of senior officials from the United States and Europe participating in this event. So it was quite I'm quite happy to be done with it, but it was a very good experience.
Thank you for reassuring us, because I think we all remember what happened when Safe Harbor was struck down. What do you think would happen if the Privacy Shield would fail the review process and the CJU discussion that's ongoing?
Well, I'd say that, like, in terms of the functioning of the Privacy Shield, there really sort of aren't any sort of outstanding issues. I mean, we've addressed sort of all of the concerns that were raised in previous reports from sort of the Commission and the European Data Protection Board. So, I mean, definitely there is, I know from my team, sort of, I have 15 people sort of who manage the Privacy Shield program. We've been conducting a great deal, we've really focused after the second report on sort of oversight and compliance with the program. And so we're conducting a lot of spot checks, false claims monitoring, proactive investigations of companies' compliance with the program, and also, if necessary, referring cases to the FTC for enforcement. And so I think, like, really in the functioning of the program on a day-to-day basis, and also I think that another important aspect is we're seeing greater cooperation between Privacy Shield and sort of European authorities, in particular the data protection authorities. And I think that's something we want to enhance in the future, because I think sort of that channel of having cases referred to us to investigate is something that's very important. But then also, I mean, you mentioned the European Court of Justice, the Schrems case, I mean, which is certainly something that is on everyone's mind. The United States, in conjunction with the European Commission, we're monitoring that case quite closely. As you probably know, the United States did participate in the Schrems 2 case at the European Court of Justice. And certainly, I mean, it's something that is yeah, we're discussing sort of with our European colleagues quite closely, and certainly having sort of participated in negotiation of the Privacy Shield following a previous judgment at the ECJ, it's something that we're looking at quite closely. And also, I mean, just sort of from the other standpoint, it's something that I think industry more broadly is concerned about, just because it does bring into question the two major transfer mechanisms, the standard contractual clauses, but then also Privacy Shield is to some extent implicated as well. And that sort of, and those two are sort of very important because they also service two different, to some extent, sets of companies. The SEC is definitely sort of, they're like a mainstay of sort of larger companies, but Privacy Shield provides a unique value because it's really accessible to small and medium enterprises. And this is something that's important because over 70% of the companies in Privacy Shield are SMEs. So that's defined as less than 250 employees. And so there's small companies who really, using the SECs or other transfer mechanisms is not really in their reach. And so Privacy Shield provides a unique value that it gives them an opportunity to participate in transatlantic commerce, either as an exporter or as a subcontractor for European firms.
Could you elaborate a bit more about what's the difference between the Privacy Shield mechanism and the SCCs? Because I'm not sure whether everyone in this room has such in-depth knowledge as you. And maybe just a quick overview, because they are basically the two most important mechanisms we have for US transfers.
Well, I mean, Privacy Shield in a nutshell is sort of, it's a enforceable framework that provides for companies to self-certify or have their optionally have themselves certified as complying with certain principles that were laid out in the Privacy Shield framework. And so those principles track with sort of European data protection law very closely. And so this is a bridging mechanism essentially to address the fact that sort of US privacy law and policy, while offering significant protections to individuals, does not look exactly like European law. And so this provides a mechanism for the US companies to certify that they are going to follow these principles, and then those commitments can be enforced by the Federal Trade Commission under their statutes for misrepresentation. And so essentially, if the US companies don't do what they say that they will do, then the FTC can go after them. But then also it provides significant recourse options for individuals. Companies have to sign up for an independent recourse mechanism. And so that provides sort of a way for individuals to, I mean, if they can't get satisfaction from engaging with the company itself, going to the IRM and with their complaints. And then finally, there's sort of a backstop of binding arbitration. And then also, Privacy Shield does include a significant national security overlay in it, that it includes certain commitments the United States has made in the national security arena, and then also the addition of the ombudsperson mechanism. And that's actually another part where it was a very well-received element of the Privacy Shield annual review, was that we have now a new ombudsperson in place over at the State Department. And this is something near and dear to my heart, because when I was at the State Department, this is something I was responsible for, was the functioning of the ombudsperson mechanisms. Now we have Undersecretary of State Keith Kroc, who is fully in place and empowered as the Privacy Shield ombudsperson. He can receive European complaints and concerns regarding national security access to data, and he can investigate those and make sure that they're properly addressed. And so that's a very important role. And then the other aspect that we were very happy about in the national security space is that the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board has now has a quorum. They were able to confirm 2 additional members. And so under the leadership of Adam Klein, who's a great individual and really effective, they are pursuing a very ambitious work program that I think would be worth everyone looking at, because a lot of the national security issues that have been raised of concern, are being addressed there. They're doing work about Presidential Policy Directive 28, the sort of on surveillance policy, but also they're starting new work on Section 702 surveillance authorities, on passenger name record data, on 215 So it's very, a lot of good work going on there that was well received in the annual review.
That's great to hear, because from the European perspective, I always feel that we live in such unsure times, because with Brexit happening, we fear that we'll need to implement all of the third country data transfer mechanisms there as well, and with Privacy Shield under scrutiny and the SEC's kind of in flux as well, we sometimes get the feeling that it's getting harder to really transfer data globally. And as we see a shift from small data protection frameworks to global movements, I think one of the cornerstones would be international data transfers to be as easy as possible, to be as easily implemented as possible for other companies. So what's your perspective on this? Because I sometimes feel that we have a different view here from Europe, from the continent, than you from the US.
I guess I would disagree with that proposition, because I think the thing is that I feel like we're both coming sort of towards the same outcome, but perhaps from slightly different directions. I think that there is a broad agreement between the United States and Europe, that we need to enable innovation and enable sort of international commerce, but at the same time, we need to protect citizens' privacy. And I think that there's, definitely in the past, there's been talk about sort of a divide between sort of Europe and the United States on these issues, but I don't think that's the case. I think that you see that the United States and our citizens are very concerned about their privacy, and that there definitely is a great deal of interest in the United States about potential privacy legislation. And then also the Federal Trade Commission has been really forward-leaning and effective in its enforcement of privacy. I think we saw the recent $5 billion settlement with Facebook. They're also investigated in Cambridge Analytica, recent major fines against Google for YouTube children's privacy issues, Equifax, TikTok. There's definitely sort of a litany of sort of enforcement actions there. But I think that you have sort of put your finger on a point that is also very important, that we need to protect privacy, but also there need to be interoperable mechanisms that allow companies to move data and do business across borders. And that's something that is difficult, because laws in this space are generally sort of national, and they're going to be different. And so those mechanisms need to be flexible enough in order to accommodate those sort of differences, while still recognizing that you can offer protection in slightly different ways. And that sort of is what underpins the Privacy Shield, is this idea that you can still sort of offer significant protection for individuals while doing it in a different manner with different institutions.
I guess you're right. And maybe it's time that we move more closely together on this issue, as well as Europe and US.
Yeah, well, I think one issue is also just sort of that as we've gotten further into the Privacy Shield and explored sort of more of its functioning, there's been more commonality. I think it's sort of, once you get sort of past the sort of headlines and actually get into the details of how things function, I was really pleasantly surprised at how good of conversations we had with sort of data protection authorities, where members of my team and the DPAs were essentially comparing notes about sort of how they deal with companies and individuals. And when you deal with sort of practical considerations like that about how you apply certain rules and how you approach certain questions, I think a lot of the sort of political differences sort of fall away, and it's more about practical cooperation.
Yeah, let's make a move for more cooperation. I'll open up to questions of you guys here at the audience. I already see one there and one. Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
This is Frank from DataGuard. Thank you, Alex, for this information you shared with us. Taking into account that the Privacy Shield and the SECs in the Schrems 2 case are under scrutiny, and face certain threats. Is there dedicated contingency planning within your Department of Commerce? Because I clearly remember 2016 when Safe Harbor was brought down. Then there was a very long time of uncertainty, and it was really we in practice were really struggling what to do. So could you share a little bit whether there is planning for certain scenarios when the CGU might bring Privacy Shield down?
Well, I guess in the first instance, I would hope that sort of like, the CJEU sees things sort of in a way that sort of does continue to facilitate sort of international data flows and provide some ability for those to continue, because I think that sort of certainly, I believe that we made sort of some very strong arguments in sort of the Schrems 2 case that the oversight and limitations on US national security policies compare very favorably with those of sort of European member states, and that sort of is the kind of standard that we should be held to. But I think certainly that, like, so in the first instance, we would hope that sort of the case has a positive outcome for the SCCs and Privacy Shield, because those are so important to international commerce and ensuring that there are protections for individuals. But then certainly we would be remiss if we weren't sort of thinking about contingencies where things went in a negative direction. And so certainly that's something that we have ongoing discussions with the European Commission, and we're sort of thinking about. But there's nothing sort of firm. And also a lot of it does depend on sort of the contours of what the case looks like and sort of what the decision is. But we'll certainly continue to watch this very closely with bated breath. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. I also have a question, because we learned so far a lot about the challenges and the uncertainties when it comes to Privacy Shield, and also Rebecca mentioned the SCCs in the case there. So I was wondering, GDPR introduces other safeguards and mechanisms for international data flows, for example, approved codes of conduct. So I would be interested in hearing your perspective on those alternative measures besides advocacy and SCCs.
I think that's something that's very interesting, and there certainly are sort of other mechanisms out there. But I think they're not, I don't see sort of a clear alternative out there that's readily available. Essentially sort of you have sort of like binding corporate rules, but that's not something that's really viable for 5,000 companies to sort of queue up for. But then also, we are very interested in the certification mechanisms under the GDPR, and that's something that we're sort of looking forward to sort of, I understand that the European Data Protection Board is working on some recommendations in that regard. But again, I don't know if that will be sort of ready, and if that would be sort of a sort of fit to purpose alternative that would sort of fit all of the sort of use cases that are covered right now by the SCCs and Privacy Shield. I think the thing is that you need sort of lots of different sort of data transfer mechanisms, because there are lots of different situations in which companies are transferring data, and you need to have flexibility. Thanks.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Yeah,
perfect. Good morning, Alex, and thanks for being here. I'm in pharma, and my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that clinical trial data is not actually covered by Privacy Shield. And the reason is that pseudonymized health data is in the US not considered personal data, which it is, of course, in Europe. So is anything being done to expand what is actually covered by Privacy Shield?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that certainly should be considered. I understand that there is some, there are some issues around sort of clinical trial data, and I understand from our colleagues in government, there's some issues around sort of health research cooperation, where there are sort of data transfer issues. That isn't sort of covered under Privacy Shield right now, but I think it's something that certainly could be discussed in the future, because it does sound as though there's a need for that, because we certainly want to see clinical trial data able to move across the Atlantic, because then it increases the amount of data you have, it increases the robustness of scientific results and our ability to ultimately get medicines that help cure diseases, and that's something that we all want. But I think we'll have to see that would certainly require negotiation of some additions or something like that. And also, certainly we might want to wait until there's an outcome in the Schrems 2 case before we look at possible expansions. But there's also other areas for potential expansion. You could look at, in the United States as well, nonprofits aren't covered by Privacy Shield, and they certainly are looking for a transfer mechanism. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Alex, for taking the time. I think we got a great overview. I think we will further our communication and cooperation in the coming months and years, and I really hope that both instruments will stay in place.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure.